This is KUNV 91.5 FM, Las Vegas, the broadcast service of UNLV. And this is Las Vegas Arts Alive, the show where we bring you a different member of the Las Vegas arts and cultural community every week to talk about who they are, what they do, and why they do it. Good evening. Welcome to Las Vegas Arts Alive. And my guest this week is a gentleman that plays jazz trumpet and is somewhat of an organizer around town of jazz events and things, and his name is Rick Jones. Hi, Rick.
How you doing, John?
Good, man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And what I want to do first is I want to start by giving the listeners some background on you. I want you to tell them where you came from and where you grew up and how much music's in the family and all that stuff.
Okay, I was originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I started, as most kids do, playing classical and everything. But once I heard Dizzy Gillespie, that all changed. And I went to Berklee College of Music for a while till I ran out of money, and it was a good experience. Then I went back to Milwaukee, and the recommendation I got from some of the better musicians at Berklee is if you really want to be a jazz player, you should find some masters, people who you really respect and study with them. So I studied with a guitarist in Milwaukee named Manti Ellis and an organist named Will Green. And then, of course, I studied trumpet with a wonderful trumpet player out there, Tom Baker, who went on to play with a lot of the big bands, Buddy Rich, et cetera, And I went into the I started my own group there as the first time I did that. And then I worked for Disney World in Florida in an all-American college band.
Wait a minute.
Experience.
Stop. I was one of the kids of the kingdom in 1974.
I was 76.
In Anaheim.
Yeah, I was at Disney World. That was great. A wonderful experience.
It was a fun program.
You mentioned organizer. Well, a lot of that comes from Disney.
Well, Disney is the king of the organizers.
You bet.
In fact, I don't know about when you were there, but in 74, they were still doing the cookie cutter thing, where we all had to have the same length hair and then the whole routine. They would come out and measure the girls' fingernails in the group, make sure they were regulation.
If they caught you not smiling twice, you were out. And that's a good thing. A lot of musicians aren't quite aware of their stage presence, and
sure,
especially when you're in jazz, you're just concentrating on the music. But that's part of the act,
I remember the day that they told us we weren't allowed to wear a costume unless we were performing to walk around the park, and we said thank you.
Well, I was in Florida in the summertime. There's an experience itself, playing outside.
I was playing on the Tomorrowland stage in Anaheim during the summer.
Yeah.
And we wore white shirts and a blue sweater with a Mickey Mouse head on it and these ugly white pants.
Oh, yeah. We had double knit suits.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, man. Well, after that, I came back to Milwaukee and I went into the Air Force, and there I had a chance to play outside in a double knit suit again.
Very, very similar to Disney.
Yeah, it was an easy transition.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful playing in the Air Force, and that was my ticket out of Milwaukee. I was guaranteed a base just outside of San Francisco, and that was great because I got a chance to see a lot of people that, unless you go to San Francisco or New York, you just don't see.
So you did some playing in the Air Force?
Yeah, I played in the mood an awful lot of times.
There's a pretty good group of guys in Las Vegas that were with the Airmen of Note through the years.
Oh yeah, Tony Osecki,
Ernie Hensley, Dick Jones, Dave Napier, that used to live here, was a director of the Airmen of Note for a while.
Oh yeah, and that was a great band.
And one of my favorite singers was actually recruited before she knew what happened.
Who's that?
And that's Michaelina Bellamy.
I had no idea.
Yeah, she was working, I think, at the O Club on the bass, and Ernie Hensley heard her sing and said, "You want to be in our band?" And by the end of the weekend, she was in a uniform.
Well, there's a lot of people in Las Vegas that went through different military bands. The piano player I normally work with, Dick Fazio, he was in the Navy band in Washington, and it's a standard. If they could do that. It's a certain standard they can do. Yeah.
My favorite armed forces story about a jazz musician was my old trumpet player friend Jerry, who I haven't seen in probably 20 years. And he ended up going to Germany in World War II, and he was stationed in Berlin. And when his CO found out that he was a jazz trumpet player, he took him out of regular detail. He said, "Put a band together. You're going to play at our officers' club, and all you got to do is march one parade a week."
Oh, that's great. I can't really tell most of my stories. I had a little difficulty with the Air Force.
Yeah.
Being a jazz musician, I was not exactly a conformist, but I had a lot of fun. And
Now, does anyone else in your family play?
oh yeah, my sister, my older sister Debbie was a bass trombonist actually, and she performed classical music. My younger sister performed, but my parents they weren't musicians. My sister gave it up eventually, and I'm just was too belligerent to quit.
Being so close to Chicago, did you ever spend time in Chicago?
Oh yeah, when I was in high school, I actually used to take the train to Chicago to study with Reynolds Schilke.
Sure.
And so
I grew up in Chicago.
Well, yeah, and I'd walk around the loop, 18-year-old kid. It was great, especially back in those days, you know.
See, I remember when I was like 18, 19 years old going to the Joe Siegel's Jazz Showcase. And
You bet.
like, incredible musicians came through there. I heard Art Blakey, from 3 feet away.
And then the festivals in that whole area, you could hear everybody, Freddie Hubbard, Art Blakey, all the New York cats. That's one of the unfortunate things. In most of the festivals here, you don't get to hear the East Coast players. You'll hear the West Coast players, and it's just a matter of logistics.
And I remember playing in big bands in some of the smallest bars
Oh, yeah.
in Chicago. There was a place in Elmwood Park called My Apartment that I played in that was like a room maybe this size.
I did more salsa gigs in the Midwest than I do out here, and that really surprised me.
Yeah, there was a lot of salsa being played when I was there. My grandfather had a band for years. He was a band leader, percussionist named Bobby Christian.
Okay.
And we played at a little joint on Lincoln Avenue called Orphans.
Well, you were lucky. You got a leg up in the business.
I actually started playing when I was almost before I could walk. Because the band rehearsed in my house. 5 years old, I'm listening to this 18-piece band in my living room every Sunday.
Well, that'll do it for you.
You get this, and it's not so much a chosen path. It's you can't get away from it.
And especially that was a big band, and at that time, big bands were still. If you were a player in a real big band, you were still a star. What got me was I was 5 years old in about 1960, and I heard Woody Herman's band, Bill Chase, Dusko Gojkovic, Lynn Biviano, right then and there. And I met Woody Herman, and right then and there I decided that's what I wanted to do. Which, for listeners out there, do not let your 5-year-old children decide their careers. They'll become jazz musicians. Not a good thing.
Well, see, I can remember when I was like 12 or 13, my grandfather took me to Mr. Kelly's.
Oh, yeah.
Like 3 weeks in a row. And we heard like Basie's band with Joe Williams and Lockjaw and Zoot. And Sonny Payne was playing drums.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next week, Buddy's band came in. And then the next week, Maynard's band came in. And I'm like, when can I start?
We see that's part of that Midwest thing, too,
Yeah.
because all the instrument companies were there and the bands would come through. I was really lucky. I got to know a lot of guys in Woody Herman's band, and I used to, when I was like slightly underage, go out drinking with Maynard's band.
Of course.
And but the guys would take me on the bus if I couldn't afford the concerts.
Right.
And so I had a real intimate relationship, and they constantly taught me things that were the subtleties of big band. Of course, so I wanted to become a big band player, but by the time I got out of the military, I realized that boat had sailed.
Oh, yeah. I made the transformation out of the big band thing pretty early.
Yeah.
And then I came here, and that's all I did for years.
Right.
Because that's where the money was.
That's where the show bands. Oh, geez, yeah.
And I did them for a living, and I had fun with them, but I would rather have done something else. I'm one of those guys where for some reason, a good number for a band is 3. Maybe 5.
Yeah, the thing with trumpet players and big bands is it becomes like who's the fastest gun in the West. And I got tired of that mentality.
Here's a question for a trumpet player. What drives a person to want to be the highest and loudest thing in any band?
You know what? There's a physical exhilaration that you actually get from doing that.
Yeah.
And when you hear it, it does it to you. When I heard Bill Chase, I mean, I still can't describe the feeling. And so you actually physically get off on it. It's its own drug. Yeah.
Because I know there's a recording in our library here at the station of the Dave Grusin All-Star Band.
Uh-huh.
And the trumpet section, and this is the truth, is Arturo Sandoval, Randy Brecker.
Oh, man.
Byron Stripling, and one other guy. And they're screaming the whole time. And it's like, my God. And I finally understood when I heard that recording, when I heard those 4 guys with Sandoval charging ahead with everything, why a friend of mine who plays trumpet in Chicago said, when he first heard Sandoval, he said, now he's ruined it for the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think Cat Anderson kind of ruined it for the rest of us too.
See, people forgot about him.
Oh, I did a concert in Milwaukee recently, and the trombonist on the gig, Dick Griffin, had been on the road with Cat Anderson, I think with Basie's band or somebody like that, Ellington, one of those.
Probably Duke's
bands.
band.
Duke's band, there you go, yeah. And I've used the Cat Anderson method over the years, but he was on the road with him when Cat was writing it.
Yeah.
And there are some really interesting subtleties. For example, when he's playing super high, he actually closes his jaw. And this is exactly opposite of what we've been taught.
Yeah.
He filed down his own teeth to make an opening. Now, I don't suggest this kind of stuff, but Cat was a legend. Oh, he's when it comes to screamers, that's the absolute screamer.
Actually, another trumpet legend is I have been amazed through my life. I know a lot of trumpet players.
That's tough. That's
strangely enough, a lot of my friends play trumpet, and it's amazing how many of you guys, the percentage that if you look at where they've come from, how many of you lead back to Bill Adam.
Yeah, you know what?
It's amazing.
Even in the Midwest, we were aware of his techniques. One of them is hanging the trumpet from a string.
But all the guys I know that went to Indiana, end up leading back to his method.
Sure.
Charlie Davis, all those cats.
Hey, Randy Brecker, a lot of those cats. Yeah. In the Midwest, there's a lot of different guys. When I was actually studying trumpet strong, I was really with more legit players like Reynold Schilke, who played in the Chicago Symphony.
No, we had a pretty good other guy in that symphony too, Bud Herseth.
Oh yeah. Well, he came after Reynold.
Yeah.
And then after, and I studied with the principal trumpet player in Milwaukee Symphony, Richard Metzger, and so I had a good foundation. And then when the big bands came through, guys like Maynard would take me under their wing and teach me the things that they'd learned from either Adams or Reinhardt or one of the other, trumpet guys that I really couldn't get to. So I'd get a lot of stuff second generation, but those techniques, especially the trumpet, hanging the trumpet from the string, that was legendary. And it really works, it's a no pressure method.
And I actually was very fortunate because of my grandfather's friendship and brotherhood with guys like Adolf Herseth.
Oh, yeah.
And those people. I actually played big band gigs with Bud Herseth a couple of times.
Oh, that would be incredible.
The old man could swing his butt off, man.
Oh, sure. A lot of those players.
And I mean, my grandfather's trumpet sections normally would be like Johnny Howell and people like that, Eddie Shadowski, Guy Furcano, Russ Iverson, Gary Slavo, George Bean.
All the top players in Chicago.
Are you hip to George Bean?
No, I haven't heard of him.
George was deep.
Yeah.
George's whole method was he had his students blowing into tire gauges.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can generate this much air, you can play this note.
Yeah, 20 pounds of pressure per square inch is what it takes to hit a high C.
Yeah.
26. So it's very much like blowing up a car tire. Yeah.
See, one of the guys that some people don't know spent some time with George still lives here. He doesn't play these days. Lynn Nicholson.
Oh, now Lynn Nicholson is one of the first cats that I heard with Maynard's band, and one of the young cats after Maynard had the European bands and stuff. Wonderful, wonderful player. I didn't know
Lynn worked with us in my grandfather's band, and then he left. He went with Maynard and did whatever he did, and I ran into him when I moved here 32 years ago.
Sure.
And in the late 80s, we were on the Caesars band together.
Okay, well, that's great.
So it's like I walked into rehearsal and I went, Lynn. It had been so many years. It was great. It was like going home,
But musicians are used to that. You're away from guys for years and you pick up right where you left off.
Oh, yeah. I know.
I was out of... I had left Milwaukee for over 20 years. When I came back, we did a recording, and it just was like not even a day had passed, and that's when we did this first CD.
Oh, sure.
It's just like some things never change.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And before I forget to do it, even though it's still early in our time, it's Rick's got a website, rickjonesjazz.com. He's also got a MySpace page. And which is a fun thing to get involved with.
Yeah, I still haven't really perfected all of this stuff.
Me too.
Every time I get something down in there, they've added new things. So,
And I mean, I'm corresponding with people that I have never been able to correspond with.
It's great, isn't
I got an email today from James Taylor. He listened to the music, he liked it, so he sent me an email.
This is the whole thing, is that jazz, if you just want to be a good player, good luck. Business has changed.
Yeah.
Now, you have opportunities you never had before. There are a lot of independent labels. You can put out your own CD.
Yeah.
You can network with people you could never network with before. And I think the real success that we have over at De Stefano's on Sunday nights is that, I have a large mailing list, and we get a lot of people in. We change the group every week.
Sure.
And people are aware. Well, I haven't heard, for example, well, this will air after we've done this, but Billy Wallace will be on this week. And
Oh, cool.
You can't hear Billy Wallace anywhere else.
Yeah.
And Benny Bennett will be
Right.
on next week. These are wonderful players that you just don't get to hear.
Sure.
And by having the newsletter and letting people know that these players will be out just this 1 week, a lot of people
Yeah.
are able to come and hear their favorite players.
Well, you
Yeah.
should call me sometime. I'll do it.
Well,
I'd
yeah,
love
come
it.
down, man.
Oh, I will.
Yeah.
So what brought you here?
Oh, well,
That's always something I'm curious about with people, because to be honest with you, I've been here 32 years. And
a long time for a Las Vegas resident.
the only place where we could play jazz when I came here was at the Union Hall at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I've heard about those sessions.
Actually, there were at one point there was music 24 hours a day down there. When I came to town, there was a 10 o'clock band and a 2 o'clock band, and you would play from 10 to 1:30, and then the other band would come in and play from 2 to 6.
We heard about that all the way back to Milwaukee.
Well, some of the greatest bands I've ever heard or been part of were there.
That's what we heard.
And what it was a bunch of guys that loved jazz that couldn't play it at work.
You'd play the same show every night
Yeah.
after night. You'd look
Yeah.
for someplace else. Yeah.
And people thought we were nuts. You'd
Yeah.
go and blow your brains out at the Jubilee show 3 times on a Friday, and then shoot
Yeah.
down to the Union at 2 a.m. and play till 6.
Yeah. One of the things is there's so many limited. It's become so limited in the West in general to have jam sessions and
Yeah.
big band sessions and stuff like that. One of the things I try to do with my website is whenever there's a jam session anywhere, I list it on my website. I want people to know where they can go sit
Yeah.
in. I'm doing the thing at Pogo's on Friday nights, and that's great because we get a lot of guys down there
Sure.
that are still doing shows, and there's nowhere else for them to go
Yeah.
to have a chance to blow. But unfortunately, even the show bands, there's so much less of that in
Oh,
Las
I know.
Vegas. Live music is...
To be honest with you, we made a great living at it, but I'm not so sure that we miss it that
But
much.
getting back to your question, why did I come to Las
Yeah.
Vegas?
In fact, we're going to save that question.
Okay.
It's break time. So let's listen to you play.
Okay.
And we'll be back with more Las Vegas Arts Alive with our guest this week, Rick Jones at KUNV 91.5 FM, your source for jazz. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Las Vegas Arts Alive. You were just listening to Rick Jones play some trumpet. There Will Never Be Another You from a CD titled Standard Time, Rick Jones. And tell us about this CD, Rick.
Well, I went back to Milwaukee after being...
And then we'll get the answer to why you came here.
Okay.
So tell me about the CD.
I went back to Milwaukee after being gone for over 20 years. And I looked up my mentor, Manty Ellis, and it was just... Manty was like a father to me, and it was like a day had never passed. And it struck me, let's do a session. Let's just record something while we're here now. And we put down a couple of cuts. And Manty said, this is pretty good. We could have something here. So I planned another session to put a few more tunes on it, a second session. And I came back about 8 months later, and we did that. And it just kind of happened. It was very spontaneous, and I had some ideas about some songs that I wanted to do, and one of the things that made it so easy, and we were talking about this on the break, is that when you come from a certain area, it doesn't matter whether you're coming from New Orleans or Chicago or New York or San Francisco. Each area has a history of strong musicians who kind of lay down a style there. For example, let's say if you go to San Francisco, you're going to run into a lot of Eddie Hendrix influenced music. If you go to New York, well, there's the list goes on and on
Yeah,
and
it
on.
does.
And Chicago, there's so many people that have created a style there. You're talking about a shuffle that all the drummers play. Well,
Well, and Chicago is also still, to this day, a tenor sax town.
Oh yeah.
And as long as Von Freeman is alive, kicking and playing, it will be a tenor sax town.
And what I wanted to capture was a snapshot of the Milwaukee sound. And it was influenced by a lot of people like Monk Montgomery and Buddy Montgomery, Wes Montgomery. They were all in that area. Freddie Hubbard came from Indiana. A lot of these players did a lot in the area. Sonny Stitt lived in Milwaukee for a while, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and a combination of all of their different influences is the Milwaukee sound. And so I wanted to put that on CD, and it was just such a thrill to play with someone who meant so much to you after those many years. So I don't care whether it sells or not. It's just a great CD. But you can buy it through CD Baby by going to my website at rickjonesjazz.com.
There you go.
Get
That's
that
right.
in. What the heck?
Help Rick pay the royalty fees on this stuff. And so now I know why I came here. Why did you come to Las Vegas, of all places?
Well, I was in Phoenix after I got out of the Air Force. My parents were living in Phoenix, so I went to Phoenix, and I was playing in 8 different big bands at first, and we were doing a lot of convention work, and it was pretty much the same book I'd been playing, the Miller book and all that. And as that work died out, I got into the salsa bands, and that was okay for a while until drunk driving laws really changed, and people didn't go to restaurants and bars to drink and listen to music, and it really changed the industry dramatically. And so my wife and I were trying to decide where the future of music would be, and we decided on Las Vegas, and we moved out here about 11 years ago. And I came out and I looked at the scene, and I decided with what was available to me at that time, I just didn't really want to do that anymore. So I quit playing for 7 years and started an entertainment support business. We were ready to start a family. I wanted something a little more stable, and I didn't want to play Dixieland gigs. I didn't want to play lounge work. You know, there's an old saying, you are what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for a jazz musician, if you stay out of an artistic scene too long and you're in a commercial scene for a long time, as much as you don't want to admit this, your playing changes. You see guys that go on cruise ships. It happens to them all the time. You can, what we call, lose your soul.
Well, I had a thing happen to me when I first moved to Las Vegas. It was like 75, and I had been playing mostly music that had a swing to it, playing a lot of jazz back in Chicago, and doing a few shows. You know, shows were always kind of easy to do for me for some reason. And I come out to Las Vegas, and the only thing available to me was lounge work.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, the most predominant music in the lounges in Las Vegas was disco.
Right.
So now I'm violating all my teacher's rules. I'm playing 4-on-the-floor bass drum endlessly and banging out 2 and 4. And after doing that for a couple of years and going on through 8 years of lounge work, I went home one night and I looked at my family and I said, I've played my last lounge gig. I'm done.
Good for you.
And what I did is I actually pulled myself out of the business where I was and started going down to the Union and playing with the Kicks bands.
I wish they were still around because that's what I'd be doing.
That's how we all got in.
Well, and, you know, and that's part of, again, creating an environment now. And it's hard to get a big band because it's even hard to get enough players for a big band anymore. But create a jazz environment where there's an ensemble feel, where there's a brotherhood, you know.
Well, see, that's missing today.
Well, that's what we're trying to bring back.
One of the things, here's a discussion that I had with a comedian, Pete Barbuti.
Uh-huh. And a good jazz trumpet player.
A great one. On this show, we talked about it, how when he was coming up, and much like when I was coming up and when you were, there were jam sessions to go to. There were places to go where you either didn't get paid or got paid just your expenses to get there. And they were places where we could actually go and fail. And we were none the worse for wear because we were learning.
That is exactly the right concept.
But every gig is the big gig.
Yep.
And you have nowhere to fail.
Now, you have to be able to take chances. In order for art and spontaneous music to grow, you've really got to be able to take chances. And I'm really glad you brought this up. Now, people are listening to it. It's Monday night. They're all in their car.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, folks, right now what you should do is you should drive down to Just Jazz. Just Jazz is on Sahara, about 2 blocks west of Maryland.
Yes, it is.
And this may be their very best night of all nights of the week.
For those of you that have lived here a while, it's across from Commercial Center, right across from Tiffany Cleaners.
And what they have on Monday nights is they have a group of kids that either is in college or just got out of college here, and they play just all the best jazz, and they take chances. It's very, very spontaneous. A very good friend of mine, Trevor Davis, is playing bass in it. But you've got to go down there and hear these guys. Adam Moses is the guitarist. He leads the group. Brian Triola is on piano. He's just wonderful. Andy Roberts is on drums. Trevor Davis is playing bass. And I heard this wonderful sax player, Julian Tanaka, on tenor.
Yeah.
Now, every week what they're going to do is a classic jazz album. This week they're doing Kind of Blue. So if you want to hear the stuff from Kind of Blue, go down there tonight. Go down there right now and hear these guys. No cover charge.
Matter of fact, Julian and Andy are products of the Academy for the Performing Arts.
Yeah.
And that's a little plug for my buddy Pat Bowen because he's the jazz guy down there.
These kids were taught right. And if you got a kid that needs some education, go to the Academy of Performing Arts because they put out really good students.
We don't want to slight Green Valley High School either because Cecil's got a great program there. A lot of the schools have great programs, but Patrick is doing miracles with some of these kids.
It's incredible.
Andy played at Montreux.
You know,
he was one of those kids.
I sat in with him Monday night and we played McCoy Tyner's Passion Dance. And that's a song that I've played just a couple times in the last 25 years because basically no one knows it. Well, these kids know it, and they played the hell out of it.
Well, see, that's a reflection on UNLV and their teachers.
You bet. It sure is.
You know, Dave Loeb, Joe LaBarbera, Tom Warrington, Joe Lano, John Abraham's also doing things over there. Phil Wigfall's over there occasionally. And they're really expanding these young minds.
And, you know, the word is a lot of those guys are going to be down there tonight for this event. So it'd be a real good one to check out. It's going to be live.
And the other thing is I was very happy when I was part of the Jazz Society board to be able to bring in Gerald Wilson to direct the kids.
Yeah.
because that's the kind of experience they need.
You know, just under one great person like that can change their concept for the rest of their lives. So that's, yeah.
Well, and you and I have worked in the situation like Gerald Wilson, but the kids never have.
Right.
Where he walked in and he's talking to the band. He says, now, when the tenor sax player's blowing, on his second 8 bars, I want the trumpets to play letter B, and the trombones in his next 8 bars are going to play letter F, and the kids are going, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like the head chart thing.
We were lucky.
almost.
We had Stan Kenton doing all that
Yeah.
stuff when we were kids. Those were great
In fact,
clinics.
you mentioned the future of jazz. One of my favorite interviews, don't remember the interviewer, but it was with Stan Kenton years ago. And the guy asked him, he said, Stan, where's the future of jazz going? And Stan thought for a second, and he said, well, I'm appearing in Cleveland next week. You know.
That's great.
So you've got the stuff going at DeStefano's. Tell them about DeStefano's.
Well, we're doing a thing at the Stefano's at 6 p.m. on Sunday nights, and it's the Rick Jones Jazz Showcase. And the idea is to change the rhythm section every week so that it's always fresh and spontaneous. And I'm mixing it up, too. I'm putting college kids with older guys and bringing people out that you don't normally get to hear because they don't have a steady gig,
Sure.
you know, and the music scene's dried up so much. We have a lot of different singers coming. We have been so lucky. We've had Melanie Moore, Ronnie Rose. We've had Josh Garcia, a wonderful young sax player, come in. Pianist Terry Ryan.
Sure.
Rich Bono. We've had Joe Locatelli, Benny Bennett, Dick Straub, Norm Ross, Larry Wild Rice. And this week, we'll be playing with Billy Wallace, Dick Straub, and Paul Miranda on drums, a young drummer. Wonderful.
I know Paul. Paul just graduated from
Yeah,
UNLV.
oh man, does Paul sound good.
Kid from Seattle.
And then the following week, we'll have Benny Bennett, Trevor Davis,
Yeah.
and Dick Fazio. You can see that this is a real mix. Sometimes these are people that don't normally play together.
Right.
But the idea is, and you know this because your group is so much this way, to us jazz purists, if jazz isn't a conversation, it isn't jazz.
It's
And
nothing.
It's right. Okay. Now, Misty's wonderful, and it can be jazz.
Yes, it can.
But 99% of the time, it's not the way
Yeah.
it's performed. What we're trying to do is try to keep it jazz, try to keep it spontaneous. And what we're trying to get is the best performance out of everyone. And it's not for the money.
Well, it's like, you mentioned the conversation aspect. I do some playing with Walt Blanton and Tony Bronco and I, and it's improvisational. Nothing's written, nothing's planned, nothing's rehearsed, and we just kind of create as we go. And we had a concert scheduled at the community college, and Tony couldn't make it, so we called Trevor.
Wonderful.
Trevor comes in. Now, what I love about Trevor is his mind is open to everything. But he walks in and he says, what tunes are we playing? And we said, we don't know. Well, do you have a book? No. We said, what do we do? I said, just go with it, man.
Play.
Just play. Because that's what we do.
And
We,
he's
in
good
fact,
with that.
We recorded that way recently.
Yeah.
And we've got a CD done now called Monuments, where it's all improvisational. We went in the studio at UNLV. And from the beginning of this experience, we noticed that the stuff we were creating had form. And almost some of it sounds written. And it was the thing where, and the conversation, when we have a human conversation, we look at each other and we read body language and things. When we went in the studio with this trio, we purposely had no eye contact.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was really bizarre. We spent a year getting together at 7 in the morning at my house.
It's a real big difference in playing.
I
I have
know.
a tendency to turn around to the rhythm section
Yeah.
a lot because I like that eye contact and stuff. And I can understand what you're saying. It's almost like being a sensory deprivation
Yeah.
tank when you're in the studio sometimes. You're locked off. It's a whole different,
Yeah, and the studio can be wrong or right for jazz.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
It really can be wrong, but it can also be very
it
right.
depends, it's again, jazz is so spontaneous. It depends on how the conversation's going.
I think one of the mistakes that's made today, because the engineers don't know any different, is they're trying to isolate everything too much.
Right. I agree with you.
The concept that Origin Records has, where everything bleeds and people just play.
Yeah.
That's what works. I mean, you give the engineer something to work with, and he works with it.
Yeah. And there are a lot of great jazz albums that come from that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
There's a great body of work coming out of Seattle right now. That's pretty scary. Their list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
I may have to move. No, I'm just kidding.
There's not a lot of work up there, but I've thought about it. Let's go, man. We
Yeah.
can be there next week.
I've got another really good gig coming up, and we were talking about this spontaneous thing. I'm doing a thing on Labor Day for the second annual Labor Day Jazz and Soul Series at Hills Park in Summerlin. It'll be an event that's from 2 to 10 in the afternoon, and this is something that Absolute Entertainment is putting on. I'm going to do this. This is just a totally off-the-wall gig for me. Melanie Moore's going to sing with me. Ronnie Payne is going to play piano. He's a wonderful piano player into a lot of reggae. Jess Gopin is going to play drums. You know Jess?
I know.
And Elvin Seals will be on bass.
Yeah.
Now, we've never played with this group together. I've worked with Melanie before, but what we're going to do is reggae and hip-hop, and we're going to do some really different kind of things.
Sure.
I like using effects on trumpet. I like using harmonizers, and I like using echo, but it doesn't fit in my Italian restaurant gigs.
No, in the right genre, it works.
And so this is like a real opportunity for me to do something completely different and exciting.
I understand.
I'm lucky I've got a salsa gig coming up in September.
Nice.
If I can keep my things varied, then I can kind of stay fresh. But when you play the same songs with the same guys week after week, some guys do that very well, and I just don't.
One of the things we did with the quintet is we issued a challenge 2 years ago when it was first being born, and we challenged each other to write.
Oh, that's good.
And every time we get together and blow, there's new music.
Yeah.
Which is great, because we can actually get together backstage before we do a concert and decide then, what do you want to play? Which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And there's other stuff going on in town that really people should go and see. For instance, there's events happening in town now that involve poets.
Right.
And jazz.
Oh, I love doing
and
that.
The
Avant-garde
marriage
stuff
is
behind
right
poets
there.
Especially. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I did a concert back in April with Keith Brantley, who's got the Poets Corner at the West Las Vegas Community Center. And Keith had never done anything with like improvisational free playing behind him. And he said, I don't even think I know how. I said, here's what we're going to start playing, and you get in there. And he did. And he was doing free association, and it worked.
Have you ever heard that Freddie Hubbard album, Sing a Song of Song Me?
Yeah.
See, now that's, you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
For the listeners, this is an album that the record companies wouldn't release at first because it's Freddie doing kind of the avant-garde thing that he was doing with Eric Dolphy at the time.
Yeah.
But behind poetry, and some of the poetry criticizes the Vietnam War, and so the record companies wouldn't release it at the time. But I think it's one of Freddie's very best pieces. Quick story, we were talking about the military before. Downbeat had transcribed the solo from one of the Freddie Hubbard things, and of course it's really out based on a tritone phrase that he plays over and over. And we were playing at a park with the Air Force Band. We were doing American Patrol for like the 9 billionth time, and I thought superimposing that solo would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, my commander didn't exactly agree with me, and so I wound up losing a stripe over that, Freddie.
That's funny. Oh, that's a great story. Let's take another break and listen to some more of your music. You picked the tune this time.
Little Sunflower.
Okay.
We just were talking about Freddie. I love
If you
Freddie
don't mind
Hubbard.
if we don't play the entire thing, we might have to fade part of it.
That's good. It's all good.
Is that okay?
That's all good.
All right, let's do that, and then we'll be back with Rick Jones, our guest this week, here at KUNV 91.5 FM. Welcome back to Las Vegas Arts Alive. You were just listening to Rick Jones and his guys playing Little Sunflower from his release Standard Time, which is available at CD Baby and at rickjonesjazz.com and at DeStefano's, I'll bet, when he plays there.
You know, we haven't been selling it, but
I'll
we will be.
I'll bet you got him in the trunk of the car. Come on.
You know what? Is the trunk of the car. That's a funny thing. I played a thing in Milwaukee recently, and
You sell watches and stuff. Yeah.
and Brian Lynch was on this gig, and he said, you know, I got a Grammy for this CD last year, and I have to sell it out of the trunk of my car.
Yep.
Which is kind of tough since I don't have a car.
Yeah.
But so please go to Brian's site and buy his album because he doesn't have a car to trunk.
You know, and the whole thing is just it's gotten a little weird.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we have things happening like, for instance, and I know this for a fact because my brother is their international retail guy at Borders. What they did is they actually made the music area of the stores smaller, but they've increased the jazz catalog.
Really?
And decreased the classical catalog and the rap catalog in that. Because the Borders people buy jazz. But yet you find labels that, unless you're under 30, they don't want to say hello to you.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't divulge this, but it's a known fact that Concord Records and Blue Note are having a hard time entertaining the thought of releasing female singers that are not under 30.
Yeah.
Because they all want the next Norah Jones.
Sure.
And there's so much music going on out there that should be heard.
Yeah, well, Toshiko Akiyoshi couldn't get a record deal, and you know, if you have a big band, you can't get a record deal.
Well, Sam Nestico.
Yeah.
The last thing he did, he had to market and distribute himself.
You know, I'm doing articles for the jazz newsletter for the Jazz Society here, and I just did an article on Walt Boneg. Wonderful, wonderful trombonist, leads a big band. And I said, so when's the next CD coming out? When I can get the money for it.
Yeah.
Everything that we do now comes out of our own pocket.
Sure.
Half the time, even the gigs we do cost us money.
Yeah.
You know, people say, well, kids, what does it take to really be a successful jazz musician? It takes a wife with a really good job.
or understanding people around you.
Yeah.
Because it's really a strange obsession that we're in.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a habit of living it and breathing it. And I mean, I remember I've had people tell me that I sometimes am playing drums when I sleep.
Oh, really?
You know?
I know. I see music. I hear music.
Yeah.
The other night I had a dream about playing trumpet. You know, in the 7 years that I quit playing, it got to a point by the end of that I couldn't sleep more than a couple hours a day because it was haunting me.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't a choice. People don't realize that we're driven to do this.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a choice. It's an
No,
addiction.
it chooses us.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't know about you, but if I go more than one day in a row without practicing, I feel guilty.
I'm a trumpet player. If I go more than one day without practicing, I'm in trouble.
Yeah. I've talked to a good friend of mine, and we're about the same age. He's probably 53 now, and we were talking one day, and he said, well, you know, I'm a trumpet player, and I've reached that point where I'll never play higher, I'll never play louder than I do now, but now the trick is maintaining what I have.
Oh.
Because it is a physical battle for you guys.
I had to do this concert in Phoenix. It was a tribute to Maynard Ferguson, and they had some trumpet players from around the Southwest. We all had to play a couple of Maynard Ferguson tunes, and then we had a featured guest with Mick Gillette from Tower of Power, and I had to have a double high C for it. Now, for a trumpet, that's like one of the that's a marker there. But if you don't do it all the time, it's just not that easy. So I got into my Cat Anderson method and made my double high C for the gig. And afterwards I said, I'm not doing this anymore.
Well,
it's just too much work.
And that double C is one of those notes that Tommy DeLibero goes, oh, the middle register.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, you know, if you do it all the time, when I was playing in salsa bands, it was a whole different thing.
I've heard stories from guys about Tom DeLibero that he'll like be walking out of the house and grab whatever trumpet is nearest the door and take it to work.
Really?
And it doesn't hurt his playing whatsoever, no matter what horn he plays on.
You know, Shilke used to say, if I wake you up in the middle of the night and you can play a high C or double high C, you should just be able to put the horn up to your lips and play it. If it's really yours, you should own it that well.
Yeah.
And that's the secret with trumpet is you have to practice all the time. It's a couple hours a day, no matter what.
Yeah. See, there's a couple of guys that are really identifiable when they're on a recording. Charlie Davis is one of them. Because out of all the LA guys who all play great, the lead player with the most energy in his playing and passion is Charlie.
I don't know. I like Buddy
me.
Childers a lot. Oh, there's another guy
Yeah,
that's got a lot of fire, man.
Charlie's got a passion thing and it's fat sound.
Yeah.
You know, Charlie can take the easiest, simplest things and make them beautiful.
Did you ever see any of those movies? Most of them are black and white B movies that were done back when Maynard was studio. It was just like the movie stars. They'd pay you on a contract, and he said most of the time he spent on the golf course. But if you hear him on, it's that big fat sound again, and you can tell instantly from the soundtrack. Okay, that's Maynard.
Well, there was a movie that Miles actually was the lead actor in Dingo.
Yeah.
And you know who played the trumpet for that soundtrack? Chuck Finley.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, Chuck was. I think he was the guy that did the.
And he was the fourth guy in the section for the Grusin All Stars.
Oh.
Sandoval, Randy Brecker, Chuck Finley, and Byron Stripling. It's like, wow.
You know, you'll see a lot of those same players. It's amazing. Maynard, a lot of those guys, if you check out any of the Fania All-Star albums, too, and I love that stuff. That's just great. Yeah.
And actually, if you look at YouTube, the Grusin All-Stars, they have that version of Cherokee on YouTube.
Oh.
And at the end, the other three guys basically bow to Arturo.
I played with Arturo once. It was with a community college band, and it was just unfortunate because the kids were really up to it and never even heard of Arturo.
Yeah.
And you hate to have your experience with a guy be that, but it was still incredible to hear him play.
See, now, a couple of questions I always ask everyone is, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, you know what? That's an interesting question right now, because what's happening for me now is truly a miracle. I'm actually having some influence on the jazz scene in trying to get people to get together and create more of a brotherhood. And if you ask me how I want to be remembered, as a guy that brought people together.
Okay.
You know?
And if it wasn't for trumpet, what do you think you'd be doing?
I'd be running for president because there's no talent in that field whatsoever. And, you know, I figured that's an easy thing.
And, of course, these views are not expressly the views of KUNV or its staff or management. As much as you and I might agree, let's do the quick disclaimer and get this clean. And, unfortunately, we are running out of time, so...
I can't thank you enough for having me.
I want to thank you for being here. Check out Rick's website, rickjonesjazz.com. And he's got royalty fees due on some of these tunes, so you better buy one.
And if you want to come to the Labor Day concert, labordayjazz.com, you can get tickets for the concert on Labor Day. You don't want to miss that.
And check out DeStefano's and listen to some music. Go to Pogo's.
Bring your axe. Play a few
that's
notes.
a good
there
idea.
You go. You bring your axe, John. You're a drummer. You can sit. You bring some sticks, some brushes.
I will.
Mallets, whatever.
I will. And thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I wish you health and happiness and nothing but music, nothing but good music.
Bright moments.
All right. Thanks, Rick. And you're listening to KUNV 91.5 FM Las Vegas, the broadcast service of UNLV. And I will see you next week on the radio. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Las Vegas Arts Alive at KUNV 91.5 Las Vegas with your host, John Nasshan. Las Vegas Arts Alive is the weekly program that brings you a member of the Las Vegas arts community to discuss who they are, what they do, and why they do it. We come to you from the studios of KUNV 91.5 Las Vegas, and we'd like to extend special thanks to Chad Martinez, our technical director.